Hello everyone, I am Adam Cole, pastor of youth ministry here at 9th and O Baptist Church, and this is Devotionables, brief devotions for busy people. It is a part of human nature to place inconveniences or burdens on ourselves in order to avoid things or experiences that we don't like. We all do it. In our minds, we have this scale that we use to weigh the inconvenience or burden that we place on ourselves against the burden of the experience that we get to avoid. And as long as that inconvenience that we place on ourselves is less burdensome than the experience we get to avoid, it is well worth the exchange. We all do this. And usually it is little or we don't even realize it, but we all do this. For one example, my wife, Abby, and I, we do not like scary movies at all. We avoid them at any cost, and that's pretty easy most of the time. But sometimes we'll go to the movie theater and one of the trailers will be for a scary movie. And so if you're in that theater with us, you will see Abby and I with two different reactions, but both trying to avoid watching this trailer. Abby will place her hand in front of her closed eyes while the entirety of the trailer. Why she does this, I don't know. Maybe her hand's a backup in case her eyes just uncontrollably open up. For me, I try to play it way more cool. I try to look tough. So you'll see my eyes straight to the floor. I'm hoping you'll think, oh, Adam finds the sticky movie theater floor far more interesting than anything going on with the trailer. And this is the cost, that embarrassment, that public embarrassment of the cost of seeing or avoid seeing this movie trailer is well worth it for us. So Jesus had a similar principle in mind when on the Sermon on the Mount, he addressed the seriousness of sexual sin. In Matthew 5:29, Jesus tells the crowd, "If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out, throw it away. For it is better that you lose one of your members than that your whole body be thrown into hell." Now, we know that Jesus' words here are not literal, but they highlight the destructive nature of sexual sin and the drastic lengths that we should go in order to avoid falling into such temptation. The severe limitation and burden that you would place on yourself, in this context, losing an eye, with here being the sin of lust, and the eye being the starting point or the center for this temptation, that is worth the cost in order to avoid destruction that comes as a result of sexual sin. And so the question for us is that how we approach sexual sin? We live in a culture around us that has an extremely high tolerance for sexual promiscuity. Not only is the culture we live in unconcerned with the destructive results of sexual activity outside of the covenant of marriage, but actually advocates for almost any pleasure that someone desires should be pursued. And not only do we need to recognize the external pressures placed on us from the culture around us, but we also must take into account the lies of the evil one, that in the middle of sexual temptation, the devil whispers in our ear that this sin isn't so bad, that the cost is minimal. And this sort of sentiment is so different from Jesus' words in Matthew 5:29. So our response must be to place extremely high limitations on ourselves, because these limitations far outweigh the burden of the destruction of sexual sin. Yes, it may look strange or weird or be embarrassing to the outside world looking in. However, when we self-impose these limitations on our own life to avoid falling into sexual temptation, it too will always be worth the cost. So, what burdens, what limitations do we need to place on ourselves today in order to keep ourselves from falling into temptation? Are there certain practical limitations that you can place on yourself today that you've been putting off because you lie to yourself saying, well, this burden is actually too heavy compared to the cost of falling into temptation? Take it from Jesus here that the limitations we place on ourselves to avoid falling into patterns of the destruction nature of sexual sin are always worth it in the end. And may we always be in prayer and rely on the Holy Spirit for His strength in the fight for purity. Thank you for listening.